Welcome back to this video on assets in automation account. Before trying to explain what assets are, I want you to take a look at this script and see if you can find the obvious problem with it. To help you out, I've even highlighted where the problem is. This is an innocent IT administrator putting in some effort to create an automation script that will perform some kind of automation operation on Azure. In this case, what the script does is tries to make a connection to Azure and it's got a hard-coded value of the subscription ID and the password. The problem with this approach is next time you try and do this on another script, you have to change the login or the subscription. What's even worse is if the subscription ID changes or the user is no more relevant and you need to change it across all the scripts, you really end up going on a witch hunt identifying where that password or that username was used. So assets allow you to just solve exactly this problem. Assets are living at the Azure automation level, which means they're globally available across the Azure automation account. And assets are a way of abstracting these unique things from within the runbooks. For example, things like variables, things like certificates, things like credentials, things like connection string. All of these are things that we tend to use a lot in scripts, but they don't really need to reside in the scripts. What if there was a way to abstract them out into a central place so that you could use them across scripts, at the same time manage them in one central location? That's exactly what assets are for. So without further ado, we will look at the implementation of assets within the Azure portal. Just quickly run through some of the asset options that are available and then work our way through creating a first runbook where we leverage one of the assets. Okay, let me flip across to the Azure portal. I'm going to pick the Azure automation account that I provisioned in the last demo. And as I come in here, you see this tile looking at you saying 21 assets. If I click on the assets, I see there are 6 assets that are available. And some you can just make sense of by the name itself. For example, schedules are telling me, I can set up a schedule. A schedule is really a point in time, a trigger for the execution of my runbook. Now, what's really great is you don't have to write and hack your PowerShell scripts by introducing while loops that never end so that your timers can trickle the script to execute at that given point in time. Instead, you could just set up a schedule and it will call that runbook on a recurring or on a unique basis as you schedule for it. So I'm going to add a schedule here, say, for example, for weekend checks for PST. And it's a recurring thing that happens, well, guess what, every week. And the recurring option is Saturday and Sunday. And it might just be a PowerShell script that I have a runbook which goes around and checks for certain things across the estate to make sure servers that are not being used are shut down. But I'm just defining a schedule for that. Now, the other thing is, while I've set up a schedule for weekend checks, weekends not common across the globe. I could have a weekend checks for UAE, and by the way, they have their weekend on Friday and Saturday. So let me just set up a recurring schedule again, change that to week, select the recurring option, and I can say Friday and Saturday. Now, if I was to schedule for both of these, then the chances are that both of these would get triggered on Saturday because they both share the same schedule. So that is something you would need to handle within your runbook itself. Azure Automation gives you a way of setting up schedules, but the implementation of how you handle the schedules resides or needs to be managed within the scope of your runbook. So coming out, let's look at modules. Now, what you would see here is when you create PowerShell scripts, you usually take dependencies on modules that are already available. Now, if you're interacting with Azure, chances are you're going to use the Azure RM module. Rather than you managing the modules within the script yourself, Azure Automation gives you a way of putting the modules at a central level within the account and then using it across all your scripts, which means if you wanted to update the module in one place and have it reflected across all your scripts, well, very easy to do. The other thing you would notice here is that you don't see all the Azure-related modules in here. And you may question, well, I'm going to be using the Key Vault, but I don't see the Azure RM Key Vault module here. But what you have is the option of either uploading your own custom modules, the ones that you've created or have evolved, or browsing the open source gallery that is available. So in the open source gallery, you can search for both the Microsoft Azure modules, but if you wanted to search for the open source modules such as XWeb, which allows you to do web administration, then that's right available. And you see this is a pretty famous module, more than 73,000 downloads. The power of open source. Otherwise, you would have to kind of manage the web administration yourself. So coming here, you have other options like certificates. The certificates that got provisioned as part of the Azure automation account provisioning process show up here. So if I wanted to add new certificates to interact with other infrastructure that was outside in a separate data center or in a vendor data center, then I can, of course, add that certificate here rather than having to manage that within my script. Then there are the other obvious ones like connection, there's credentials. So say, for example, if I wanted to create a script that tweeted something every time it got triggered, well, clearly I can put in my Twitter account credentials here. Let me give you another example. If you wanted to publish the execution updates of your runbook to a Slack channel or to a Teams channel, then you can put in the credentials that need to be used as part of calling that runbook to do the publication right within here, and then proudly use that across all your PowerShell runbooks. So let's look at the variable section. In the previous demo, as we provisioned the connection with our GitHub repository, you see it secretly stored the OAuth token that it uses to integrate with GitHub as part of the variables. This is just dogfooding its own implementation. The benefit here is that variables can be different types. As you can see, you have the option for string, you have Boolean, date, time, integer, and not specified. Non-specified simply means it's a null that you will instantiate as part of your own PowerShell implementation. So I'm going to put a very simple variable in here. Let's call it user name. And I will use that as part of my runbook that I will create in this demo. So let me just give it a default value called Tarun Arora. Let's not encrypt it. Let's click create. And that means the variable is now created. And we've just briefly looked at all the assets that are available. While we're going to cover runbook in great detail, but just to show you how variables can be used or assets can be used within runbooks, I'm just going to create a runbook. I won't spend too much time explaining the types or the options here, because we'll cover that in a separate video. So let's just create a runbook, call it ISE training .01 demo runbook. And the type I'm going to just select as PowerShell. This is for demo only. Click create. Behind the scenes, it's just creating a new PowerShell-based runbook for me. And I get into this beautiful screen where I have an editor for PowerShell right within the scope of Azure. Now, you see I've got the option of publishing these changes into the GitHub repo that I connected. This is great, because as I'm working on a script, if I wanted to collaborate on this script with my peers who are using the Git repo, then it gives me a two-way channel to do that. What it also gives me is a test pane. So as I write the script here, I have the option of testing this script right within the Azure portal. So I'm going to create a very simple script here, which does no more than print hello world. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to retrieve the variable that I set up as I was showing you as I created the variable 2 seconds ago. And I don't need to work out how I need to do it or what is the syntax for it, because I could simply browse to the asset sections, the variable section, and go into the username and say, get variable. Done, right? Now, of course, I could assign it to a variable. So let's call it username. And then I also have the option of updating this variable right from within this runbook. And I could do that by saying set variable. And you see here, it gives you the option of passing the value. So what that means is if you are performing an operation within one runbook and an output obtained from that needs to be used by another runbook, then you can use the variables to consume that variable input, store it, and then consume it as part of the execution of another runbook. The other benefit that you get from within here is that you could nest runbooks within runbooks. So for example, I could come in here and as part of the execution of this runbook, if I wanted to trigger another runbook, then I could add that also right from within here. So we looked at assets. We looked at creating a vanilla runbook, which consumes the assets, in this case, a variable. We looked at how easy it is to retrieve variable values, how easy it is to update variable values, and where it's really beneficial collaborating on outputs from one script, inputting into another. Variables can become the channel to do that.